Now let's dive right in. We begin the evening with Congressman Peter King out of New York. Congressman King is consistently ranked among the top 10 most bipartisan members of the House of Representatives, and we are delighted to be kicking off this evening's conversation with him. Welcome, Congressman King. And joining the Congressman on stage is my colleague, The Hill's Editor-in-Chief, Bob Cusack. Gentlemen.
Thank you, Jack, and thank you, Congressman, for joining us tonight.
Great to be here.
And everyone
Thank
for showing up. I was thinking about, we were having a newsroom meeting, and I said I have to leave and get out of deadline, our print deadline, and they said, what's the event on? And I said, it's bipartisanship. And it's quite a day to have an event on bipartisanship in multiple ways, because on Capitol Hill, everyone's singing Kumbaya. The Senate's acting like the House now. It's kind of a circus. We're going to have a hearing tomorrow that is going to be quite interesting. But seriously, Congressman, I mean, why isn't there more bipartisanship? And do you think that there's hope going forward?
Okay, first of all, great to be here. My son graduated from AU many years ago, and I used to come here many times. In any event, great to be here, Bob. I'd say there's several reasons why bipartisanship has gone away, and I don't think it was ever as sweet and as mellow as people say it was in the past. But on the other hand, you had the reality that up until then, the most conservative president ever was Ronald Reagan, and probably the most liberal speaker ever was Tip O'Neill. And I've spoken to people who said they really didn't like each other as much as they sort of profess now, but they knew they had to get the job done. And they could make deals, like on Social Security, for instance, which would be almost impossible today. And they also knew that once they made the deal, they could deliver their parties. What's happened since then, I think, is a combination of cable television, social media, the breakdown of party organizations. I mean, I come from a old-time Republican organization in New York, and we can talk about that later. But there's something to be said for machine politics or organization politics or whatever, in that it forces you to be dealing with people on a regular basis. You don't just come in as a frustrated middle-aged guy with $10 million to spend. You decide you want to go to Congress and you can run. You have to work your way up, and you have to learn the ropes. And anyway, and also the other one is reapportionment. So today, as a practical matter, even if there's a wave, one way or the other, 90% of incumbents are going to be reelected. Right. And most years it's probably 95% are going to be reelected, no matter what. Because the way the lines are drawn, the only way you can lose is not in November, but in the party primary. And so you saw Eric Cantor losing. You've seen, and just recently, Joe Crowley, right. Mike Capuano. So, and they were defeated by people from really the hard left of the party and the hard right of the party. I mean, whoever thought Eric Cantor would lose for not being conservative enough? And so when it comes time to make a deal or to broker a deal, and if I consider myself slightly right of center, blue-collar conservative, and I have a lot of things I really believe in. But I also realize that in a democracy, if you can get 60, 70, 80% of what you're looking for, you take the deal and run. Right. But if you have to worry about the party base coming after you for not getting 100%, it makes it very hard for the leadership to put together a deal. Because you're going to run in a primary. There's a rule that 5% of each party is pretty extreme, maybe 10% of each party is pretty extreme. The other rule is maybe 15% of the voters come out in a primary. Well, you know the people who have extreme views are going to come out. So it's very hard for you to run in a primary and say, I was able to work out a great compromise. They say you're a rhino, or now on the left, I don't know what they call you. You're a sellout to Donald Trump or something. But the fact is, so it's harder to make a deal because the way the lines are drawn and your real threat comes in the primary. Then you have cable TV, where you can live in an alternative universe, and you can watch channels where actually all the facts given, for the most part, they're accurate facts. But they're done selectively. And same, all the knowledge that's available on the internet today. Again, though, you can always find some website that's going to reinforce your views. And again, the facts are pretty accurate. They're taken out of context often. So with all of that, it's really hard to form a consensus, to get a consensus, and like I remember John Boehner, and I don't have all the numbers exactly right, but I know at the end of 2012 when the Bush tax cuts expired, my understanding was John, I think, worked out a deal, somehow he got it, and President Obama had just been reelected, where I think 97, 98% of the Bush tax cuts were going to survive. Well, that was attacked in the right-wing media as been a 2% tax increase. Right. And it went down, it lost. And so then he had to make a deal which was worse than the one we started out with. But it went down pretty overwhelmingly on the House floor because the Republican talk shows and the social media just barraged Republicans. Now, I'll end up on this. In 2011, when Tea Party had taken over, Republicans had taken over, and John Boehner sat down with Barack Obama because we were going to shut the government down if the debt limit wasn't increased.
Right.
Oh, in fact, we wouldn't increase it unless there were spending cuts made. My understanding is that Barack Obama and John Boehner worked out a deal where taxes would be allowed to go up, and also there'd be changes in Social Security. It wouldn't affect anyone in the short term, but it was
down the road.
Right. And we wouldn't actually raise taxes, but we would allow some tax cuts to expire. So it was all worked out. By the end of the day, the deal went out the window. Somebody on Nancy Pelosi's staff leaked out to the left about the deal, and somebody on the Republican side leaked it out to Rush Limbaugh. And by the end of the day, both the president and the speaker denied there was ever a deal.
Mm-hmm. Well, what is you mentioned President Trump. What is his role? Some say he's made this town far more polarizing. At the same time, others say, well, if you look at Barack Obama, he passed Obamacare without any Republican votes, and conversely, on the legislation side, is the tax cuts passed without any Democratic votes. And it used to be, whether it's tax cuts in the 80s, as you mentioned, or a Balanced Budget Act, 1997, wide bipartisan. That had major changes to Medicare, of all things. Who is it? Is it Trump? Is it Obama? Is it the Freedom Caucus? Is it the Ted Cruz's of the world? I remember you said, I'll take cyanide if Ted Cruz wins a Republican presidential nomination. So not a big fan of Ted Cruz.
I think I said that was a reasonable option, I think is what I said. So don't misquote me.
It's all right, it's all right, it's all right. Fake news, fake news.
I think Donald Trump, in many ways, symbolizes the times. I've known him really not that well in New York. I knew his brother pretty well, but I've gotten to know him very well since over the last 3 years. I think what he did was really tap into what was already there. Just like in some way, in his own way, Bernie Sanders did. I'm not saying they have the same style,
right,
but I mean, I don't think anyone would have told you in 2015 that there was this large progressive wing in the Democratic Party. Basically, between Bill Clinton, who certainly moved the party to the center, and President Obama, who didn't go that far to the left. I mean, some of his issues were, but for the most part, he ran as a mainstream Democrat. I don't think people thought that there was a Bernie Sanders wing of the party, because he wasn't even in the party.
Right.
And yet, that's where the energy is coming from. And so I think Bernie Sanders in one way, and then Donald Trump in the other, both tapped into anger on, in both parties and among the American people. My district is only 34% Republican. President Obama carried it twice by 4 or 5 points. Donald Trump carried it by 9. It was a 14-point turnaround. It's also 35% minority in my district, Hispanics and African Americans. So there's an anger there that he tapped into. He certainly doesn't help the situation. But on the other hand, when you figure the day after his election, they were holding demonstrations outside Trump Tower, and then you had the inauguration where there were fires being set. I got caught outside an inaugural ball with my family where the cops had to basically get people back to their cars. So it's I wouldn't blame President Trump. I think he's trying to channel it in a certain way. And again, I haven't seen much conciliation coming from the Democrats either. So I think both sides. By the way, people say in politics that you always hear, people, why can't you get along? Why can't you work things out? As soon as you do, you're called a traitor. So I mean, it's really there's really these competing or these alternative theses out there.
So looking, I mean, a lot of people say that President Trump is not an ideologue, and he has had Republican majorities, just like Obama did, that Mitch McConnell famously said, well, Obama didn't call me in the beginning of the Congress because he didn't need to. He had the votes to pass the So number one, first two-part question. Number one, do you think, what are the chances that the House flips? And there certainly are going to be more Democrats, barring something really unusual, in Congress next year. So do you think, regardless of whether the House flips or not, there could be some type of bipartisan agreement on infrastructure, or maybe immigration or something else?
I wish, going back, I wish they'd started with infrastructure rather than health care. And I'm saying this now as a New Yorker. I think, and I'm not quoting him on this, but I think that Chuck Schumer sort of looked forward to sitting down negotiating with President Trump, 2 New Yorkers. Each guy thought he was smarter than the other.
All right.
They go in the room. I think if we had done that infrastructure, there would have been more grounds for the two of them to work something out. Once it became health care, I mean, they were demonstrating outside Chuck's home in Brooklyn that he was too conservative and not liberal enough.
That's right.
And so basically, it took away his ability to negotiate. President Trump was, again, we had people in our party who wanted a totally pure health care reform, from their perspective. So listen, I hope the Democrats don't take over. Obviously, there's a trend that's going toward them, but it's a long way from now to Election Day. And but any time there's an off-year election, the first off-year election of a president's term, it can be tough. And but again, I've seen different type polls, and it's just like I saw them in 2016. So I would say right now it's probably 50-50. But you're right, one way or the other it's going to be close. And if Republicans do hold it, it's going to be probably pretty tight. And it would involve a lot of members who got elected by smaller margins.
Right, right.
And Democrats, I'm not hopeful, though. If they take over, I think that they're going to be in the mood, at least their base is going to want to go for impeachment. They're going to want to really take a hard line against.
Especially with the 2020 presidential race in full swing, right? We're going to open up for questions. We have a few minutes left, so if you have any questions for the Congressman, please raise your hand. Just on a follow-up to that, while people think of their questions, who is going to be the next top House Republican, whether that's Speaker or a Minority Leader?
I would say Kevin McCarthy. Kevin McCarthy, Steve Scalise are both good guys. I think McCarthy, maybe it's because I'm more of an organization guy, even though I can be rebellious within the party. I still like the idea of a structure. And the fact that Kevin is the majority leader, I think it makes sense that he move up to become Speaker.
But do you think it will be easy for him to get? A lot of people said that Ryan would have left Congress had McCarthy had the votes, and then you could move to have him be Speaker today.
No, because this really goes back to the point we had at the beginning. Nothing's easy anymore. He could end up winning with 2/3 or 3/4 of the Republican conference, which in the past would have been guaranteed he'd be the Speaker. But all you need, especially let's say it's a 10-vote margin, a 15-vote margin between Democrats and Republicans, 20 guys hold back their vote.
Sure.
And we have no Speaker. And then 20 people become the power brokers. So, no, I guess what I was saying is I think the solid majority of Republicans right now, I would say, will support Kevin McCarthy. What happens on swearing-in day? I thought it was crazy several years ago when those guys were holding back from supporting John Boehner. Again, there can be certain real conscience issues where you say, I can never vote for this guy for Speaker or this woman for Speaker because they're so evil or because they're... But the fact is, if the overwhelming majority of your party votes for someone, party loyalty has to mean something. Otherwise, we end up like, the Italians have had 90 governments since World War II. You had, what was it, Third French Republic, was one after the other was collapsing. We don't want that. We want a certain amount of stability. So we can kill each other behind closed doors, but once we get a choice, I think Tip O'Neill was elected Democratic whip at the time by like 1 vote or 2 votes or something, and if they had held back on the anyway,
it would have been a mess.
Yeah,
right,
yeah.
right. Any questions from the audience? Right here.
Congress, is this on?
It is on.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, yeah.
Congressman, I remember well, I don't remember, I wasn't alive, but I do recall watching videos of Maxine Waters telling you to shut up.
You weren't alive then? Oh my God, you're really good.
So how do you approach a situation in which other Congress members are not open to bipartisanship and try to shut you down for your views?
Actually, I'm not that sensitive. I mean, we say worse things than that in New York.
So what was that? What happened back then?
Oh, I was on the banking committee, and this was during the Whitewater hearings in the summer of 1994, and I was I was like one of the guys at the bottom level, and now I'm number 1 in seniority. But anyway, I was the bottom level, and I was interrogating or questioning Maggie Williams, who was Hillary's chief of staff. And it had something to do with what happened in Vince Foster's office. Was the office cleaned out, or whatever it was? It was a whole. And I'm like 1 minute into the questioning, and all of a sudden this woman in the back starts screaming, "Shut up! What are you saying?" And we started yelling back and forth at each other. And that was a little dramatic. And then the next day, I shouldn't be saying this publicly. Anyway, I decided, we get the 1 minute so anybody can get up to say something early in the day. So I say, I'm going over the House floor. I'm going to attack Maxine Waters. Make sure you call her office so she watches. I go over there, and she's not going to tell me to shut up. I can tell the American people to shut up, and I give her the whole thing, So Maxine goes racing over, and she arrives at the House floor out of breath. She goes to the microphone, and she starts yelling about me, and they took her words down because she
went too far.
Now, meanwhile, once a person's words are taken down, the whole House has come to a halt, just lets resolve by the Speaker.
Right.
Well, Tom Foley was downtown somewhere. So for like an hour and 15 minutes, the House was standing there with nothing happening because they couldn't find the Speaker. And my mother, I'd just been elected to Congress the year before, she's calling up, somebody told her that I had caused the whole Congress to collapse. You know,
That's really good.
having said that, Maxine, they worked out something where she didn't apologize. Maxine would never apologize, but she said something and I consented to it. And actually, we get along, believe it or not. Listen, she's hot-tempered. I think she goes too far sometimes. It's pretty extreme. I'm talking about impeaching the president, and it's okay to, go after people in restaurants, all that. But as far as dealing with her, we've had some, actually, some legislative deals we worked together on, and the Banking Committee, or now Financial Services Committee, I'm dating myself again. I can't believe you weren't even born. That seems like yesterday. Any event, that committee, like Barney Frank, again, he'd be on the liberal wing of the Democratic. We worked out a lot of stuff together on terrorism, risk insurance, and others. And his word always meant something. And Maxine, I can flood insurance, things like that. We have some common interest. Again, one of the advantages, and I'm sure Maxine came up through a rough political upbringing herself. I in Nassau County, I mean, I had to put up with Al D'Amato, who's still a good friend, and you had Cuomo, Koch, D'Amato. I mean, everyone kills each other in New York. We don't take it personally. You go out and have a few drinks afterwards. So Maxine and I, we see each other. We always say hello to each other and how you doing and all that.
Yeah. We've run out of time. Please thank the Congressman for joining us. And hand it back to Jack. Hey.